He lifted his foot, ready to move forward, because every sensor said the path was clear. He had training, experience, and years of survival behind him. There was no sound, no warning, no reason to stop. But beside him, his K9 slowed down, not in fear, not in confusion. The dog sniffed the air, scraped the wood once, and sat down. In that 1 second, the man had a choice. Trust the machines that saw nothing, or trust the instinct that could not explain itself. He chose to stop.
Hold on, just a little further.
Moments later, the dock exploded where he would have stepped. No heroics, no luck, just 1 second of trust that turned into a miracle.
Go!
This is the story of a Navy SEAL who learned that sometimes God saves us not by pushing us forward, but by asking us to stop. Port Townsend lay under a low, restless sky, the kind that never fully decided whether it wanted to rain or merely threaten it. The harbor breathed slowly in the dark, waves tapping against aging wooden pilings with the patience of something that had outlived too many men. Sodium lights flickered along the docks, painting the fog in dull amber streaks, while the wind carried the sharp smell of salt, rust, and wet rope. It was the kind of night where sound traveled strangely, where distance lied, and where instincts mattered more than sight. Chief Petty Officer Lucas Hartman moved at the front of the formation with the calm precision of a man who had learned to survive by never rushing. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with the compact strength of someone whose body had been shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His dark hair was cropped short, already threaded with early gray at the temples, and his face carried the quiet wear of long service. An old scar near his left brow, faint lines carved by sun and sleepless nights. Lucas was not loud by nature. He spoke little, listened carefully, and when he gave an order, it carried weight not because of rank, but because he had earned trust the hard way. Beside him moved Havoc. The German shepherd was 7 years old, past the reckless energy of youth, but far from slow. His coat was thick, dark sable, layered with streaks of gray along the muzzle, and spine, catching what little light the harbor offered. His eyes were alert without being frantic, amber and steady, the gaze of an animal that observed more than it reacted. Havoc's gait was controlled and economical, each step placed with intention. He did not pull at the lead, nor did he lag behind. He stayed close enough for Lucas to feel his presence without needing to look. A silent partnership built over years of training, mistakes, and nights that never made it into reports. The rest of the team followed at measured intervals. They were experienced operators, men in their early 30s on average, carrying themselves with the subdued confidence of professionals who had learned that bravado only got people killed. Their gear was dark and functional, weapons held low but ready, faces mostly hidden beneath helmets and shadow. No one spoke. There was no need to. Hand signals and body language carried more meaning than words ever could in a place like this. The mission itself was straightforward on paper, a routine nighttime sweep of the eastern docks following an anonymous tip. Nothing specific, nothing confirmed. The kind of task that rarely made headlines and often lulled people into lowering their guard. Lucas had seen enough of those missions turn ugly to know better. He trusted procedures, yes, but he trusted patterns more, and he trusted Havoc most of all. They advanced along a narrow stretch of wooden decking that creaked softly beneath their boots. The planks were old, reinforced here and there with newer metal brackets that gleamed faintly through the fog. Lucas kept his steps light, distributing his weight the way he had been taught years ago. Ahead, the dock curved slightly toward a cluster of storage sheds, their silhouettes hunched like tired animals along the waterline. Havoc's pace changed. It was subtle enough that no one else noticed at first. His stride shortened by half a beat. His head lowered a few inches. His ears shifted, angling forward not toward a sound, but toward something less defined. Havoc inhaled deeply, once, then again, drawing the air through his nose in measured pulls. His tail, usually relaxed and low, stilled completely. Lucas felt it immediately. Years of working together had trained him to register the smallest deviation in the dog's behavior. This was not distraction. This was not curiosity. This was assessment. They took another step. Havoc slowed further. His body grew taut, muscles tightening beneath his coat as if bracing against an unseen force. Then, without hesitation or noise, Havoc sat down. It was not a collapse. It was not uncertainty. It was deliberate, final. Lucas lifted his foot and stopped. The moment stretched. Fog drifted past their legs. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy clanged softly against its chain. Lucas did not look at Havoc right away. He didn't need to. The message was already clear. Whatever Havoc had detected, it was not something to test with another step. Lucas lowered his foot slowly and raised his hand in a tight, controlled signal. The team froze, then responded instantly, retreating 2 full paces back along the dock. Movements were careful, synchronized, free of panic. Lucas dropped to one knee beside Havoc, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy, boy," he murmured, more for the team than the dog. Havoc remained seated, eyes locked on a spot ahead that looked no different from the rest of the dock. Lucas gestured again. A compact ground-penetrating sensor was brought forward, followed by a handheld surface scanner designed to detect disturbances beneath wood and metal. The devices were state-of-the-art, sensitive enough to pick up voids, wiring, density changes, things humans could not see or smell. One of the operators swept the scanner slowly across the planks where Havoc had stopped. Nothing. No alarm. No fluctuation. The readout remained flat and reassuringly normal. The ground sensor followed, its quiet hum cutting through the night as it traced the dock's surface inch by inch. Still nothing. No anomalies, no signatures, no clear reason for concern. The team exchanged brief glances. The equipment said it was clear. Havoc did not move. Lucas studied the readings again, then looked at the wood beneath them. The planks were weathered, uneven, stained by years of salt water and neglect. To human eyes and machines, they were unremarkable. Lucas felt the familiar tension rise in his chest, the kind that came when training and instinct pointed in different directions. He thought of all the times technology had failed in places far less forgiving than this. He thought of how many nights Havoc had been right when nothing else was. Lucas made his decision. "We hold," he said quietly. "Nobody advances." There was no argument, no hesitation. Orders were acknowledged with slight nods and subtle shifts in posture. The sensors were withdrawn, the team maintaining distance. Lucas stayed where he was, one hand resting lightly near Havoc's shoulder, the other braced against the dock. He could feel the faint vibration of the harbor through the wood, the slow movement of water beneath them. Minutes passed. The fog thickened, curling around their legs like something alive. The city behind them remained unaware, lights glowing warmly in windows that belonged to people sleeping through the danger entirely. Lucas remained still, aware of his breathing, aware of Havoc's steady presence beside him. Whatever waited ahead would wait a little longer. And for the first time that night, Lucas Hartman was absolutely certain that stopping had been the right choice. Port Townsend did not wake when the explosion came. The city remained folded into sleep beneath its low clouds, the rain that had threatened all night finally beginning to fall in a thin, mist-like drizzle that softened the harbor lights. The blast was swallowed almost instantly by fog and water, its sound dulled by distance and weather, as if the night itself refused to acknowledge how close it had come to bloodshed. The detonation ripped through the section of dock Lucas Hartman had almost stepped onto, splintering aged planks into jagged shards and hurling fragments of wood and rusted metal into the black water below. The surface of the harbor erupted briefly, then settled into rippling silence. For a fraction of a second, time fractured, noise without direction, motion without meaning, before training took over. Lucas hit the deck hard, instinctively pulling Havoc down with him as debris whistled overhead. His helmet rang sharply, a high-pitched whine filling his ears, but his body moved on habit alone. He rolled, checked his limbs, felt pain bloom along his ribs, then forced it aside. Around him, the rest of the team reacted with similar precision, spreading outward, weapons up, eyes scanning for secondary threats. No one screamed. No one panicked. They had all been close enough to death before to recognize its breath. Havoc was already on his feet. The German shepherd stood rigid beside Lucas, muscles coiled tight, ears pinned forward, eyes fixed on the smoking ruin where the dock had been. His breathing was fast but controlled, nostrils flaring as he processed the sudden violence of sound and scent. At 7 years old, Havoc was seasoned enough not to bolt, not to bark, not to chase chaos. His reactions were deliberate, shaped by years of exposure to explosions that never fully became routine. There was no fear in him now, only alertness, sharpened to a painful edge. Lucas pushed himself upright, ignoring the sharp protest from his side. He reached out automatically, resting a hand against Havoc's shoulder, grounding himself in the solid warmth of the dog's body. "You good?" he asked quietly, not because Havoc could answer, but because the ritual mattered. Havoc did not look at him, but his posture eased a fraction, as if acknowledging the contact. The team leader, a stocky man named Ryan Keller, moved into Lucas's peripheral vision. Keller was in his early 40s, built thick through the chest and arms, with a shaved head and a beard that never quite hid the permanent crease of concern between his brows. He was not a man given to dramatics. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and low. "Everyone accounted for," he said. "No injuries that matter." Lucas nodded once. He did not look back at the crater. He already knew exactly where it was. He had memorized that spot the instant Havoc sat down. Smoke drifted lazily upward, carrying the sharp chemical tang of explosives layered beneath the older smells of seawater and rotting wood. Lucas recognized it immediately, not the clean signature of military-grade ordnance, but something rougher, improvised, masked beneath environmental noise. He thought of the scanner's blank readout, the way the numbers had stubbornly refused to change. "What did we miss?" Keller asked, not accusing, simply stating the question that sat heavy in all of them. Lucas exhaled slowly. "Something buried shallow, shielded, or timed to movement instead of pressure," he said. He paused, eyes narrowing. "Or something that doesn't look like a problem until it becomes one." Keller glanced down at the broken dock, then back at Havoc. "Dog knew?" "He didn't know," Lucas replied quietly. "He smelled it." The rain began to fall harder, tapping softly against armor and helmets, hissing as it met the still warm debris. Emergency protocols kicked in without discussion. The team pulled back to a secure perimeter, setting lights and markers while calling in the appropriate units. Lucas moved through the motions, his mind replaying the seconds before the blast with obsessive clarity. He remembered the sensor's hum, the flat, reassuring line on the display, the certainty those tools were designed to give. And then he remembered Havoc slowing down. Lucas crouched beside the edge of the dock, peering into the dark water where pieces of wood still floated like bones. He had trusted technology because it was designed to be trusted. He had trusted Havoc because experience had taught him that instinct did not lie. It only spoke in a language most people had forgotten how to hear. A younger operator, barely past 30, hovered nearby. His name was Evan Miles, lean and long-limbed, with a nervous energy that had never fully burned off despite years of service. He watched Havoc with open respect, eyes wide. "Sensors said clear," Evan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Lucas glanced up at him. "Sensors measure what they're built to measure," he said. "They don't measure intent." Evan nodded slowly, absorbing the words, then looked away, unsettled. As the rain continued, Lucas felt the delayed tremor run through his body, the aftershock that always followed close calls. He flexed his fingers, grounding himself again, aware of the quiet truth settling in his chest. If he had taken that step, if he had argued with the dog, trusted the screen instead of the silence, this night would have ended very differently. Havoc shifted beside him, lowering himself into a sit once more, eyes never leaving the damaged dock. His body language was not one of satisfaction or relief. It was vigilance. Whatever had been there was gone now, but the memory of it lingered in scent and sound. Lucas stood slowly, his movements careful. He rested a hand briefly against Havoc's head, fingers brushing the coarse fur between the dog's ears. The rain darkened Havoc's coat, deepening the grays along his muzzle. "You caught it," Lucas said under his breath, even when nothing else did. The harbor remained quiet, the city still asleep beyond the fog. Somewhere, far from this dock, people dreamed through the rain, unaware of how narrowly the night had spared them. Lucas straightened, shoulders squaring as the weight of responsibility settled back into place. Technology had spoken. Havoc had answered. And Lucas knew with absolute clarity which voice he would listen to next time. Morning came to Port Townsend slowly, as if the city itself was reluctant to face what the night had nearly taken. A pale gray light filtered through low clouds that still clung stubbornly to the harbor, blurring the line between sea and sky. The rain had eased into a fine mist, leaving the docks slick and dark, the wooden planks swollen with moisture and age. Gulls cried somewhere above the fog, their voices sharp and impatient, while the town behind the waterfront stirred back to life, unaware of how narrowly routine had brushed against catastrophe. Lucas Hartman stood near the edge of the cordoned-off dock, hands resting loosely at his sides, posture relaxed in a way that came only after years of learning how to conserve energy. He had slept little. The night replayed itself whenever he closed his eyes. The moment Havoc slowed, the empty certainty of the sensor readouts, the explosion that followed anyway. Lucas wore the fatigue quietly, the same way he carried most things. His dark tactical jacket was unzipped now, revealing a simple gray shirt beneath, the fabric stretched slightly across a frame still solid despite the miles and years. His expression was calm, but there was a sharpened focus behind his eyes, a sense that some internal line had shifted and would not easily settle back into place. Havoc sat beside him, unmoving, his body angled toward the water. In daylight, the German shepherd looked older than he had under the harbor lights. The gray around his muzzle was more pronounced, his coat heavy with damp, but his eyes remained alert and steady. 7 years had softened none of his attention, only refined it. Havoc was not restless. He did not pace or pull at the leash. He simply watched, absorbing the harbor as if committing every sound and scent to memory. He had been checked thoroughly by a veterinarian earlier that morning and declared fit, though Lucas had never doubted it. Havoc carried stress differently than humans did. He stored it quietly, turning it into vigilance rather than fear. The decision to keep Lucas at the harbor had come quickly, delivered in a low-voiced conversation that felt more like an acknowledgement than an order. He was no longer here as part of an active strike element. He was here because Havoc had done what no sensor or algorithm could, and the people in charge wanted that advantage close. Lucas accepted the role without comment. He understood the unspoken truth beneath it. If they missed something again, the cost would be measured in lives rather than reports. Temporary fencing ringed the damaged section of dock now, bright tape fluttering weakly in the breeze. Investigators moved through the area with deliberate care, their movements slow, methodical. Lucas watched them from a distance, aware that his presence was both welcome and carefully observed. He did not interfere. He waited. That was when he noticed her. She stood a short distance away from the main cluster of personnel, studying the dock with a concentration that bordered on intensity. Elena Brooks was in her mid-30s, of average height and slim build, with dark hair pulled back into a practical knot at the base of her neck. Strands had escaped and clung to her face in the damp air, but she seemed oblivious to them. Her clothes were functional rather than polished. Dark jeans, sturdy boots, a weatherproof jacket with a city engineering insignia stitched near the shoulder. There was nothing ornamental about her, nothing wasted. She held a tablet under one arm, stylus tapping lightly against its edge as she examined the structure in front of her. Elena's face was composed, but her eyes betrayed something sharper beneath the surface. She looked at the harbor the way a person looks at a puzzle that has already cost them something. Lucas recognized that expression immediately. It was the look of someone who had learned the hard way that details mattered and that mistakes echoed long after the noise faded. She approached the damaged area cautiously, stopping just short of the restricted zone. One of the officials spoke to her briefly, gesturing toward the dock, then stepped aside. Elena nodded once, her movements efficient, professional. She crouched, running a gloved hand along the exposed edge of a plank, her attention focused not on the blast mark itself, but on what surrounded it, the joints, the reinforcements, the places where old materials met new. Lucas found himself watching her longer than necessary. Havoc shifted slightly, ears angling in her direction. His posture changed just enough to register interest, though not alarm. Lucas glanced down at him, then back at the woman. That, more than anything, drew his attention. Havoc rarely noticed people unless they mattered to the environment in some way. Elena straightened and finally noticed Lucas standing nearby. Her gaze flicked briefly to Havoc, then back to Lucas, assessing. She walked toward him with a measured confidence, stopping a respectful distance away. "You're the handler," she said. It was not a question. Lucas nodded. "Lucas Hartman." "Elena Brooks," she replied. Her handshake was firm but brief, her grip steady. "Structural engineering, civil side." Lucas inclined his head slightly. "You're the one they called in after the blast." "Yes." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then added, "I've worked this harbor before." There was something in the way she said it, a restraint that suggested more than familiarity. Lucas did not press immediately. He had learned that some truth surfaced better when given space. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the investigators move along the dock. The fog thinned slightly, revealing more of the water below, dark and deceptively calm. Elena broke the silence first. "Your dog was the only one who reacted," she said, her tone thoughtful rather than skeptical. "The sensors didn't catch it." "No," Lucas agreed. "They didn't." Elena nodded, eyes narrowing as she studied the structure again. "That doesn't surprise me as much as it should," she said. "Some of these docks are a patchwork of decades, new materials bolted onto old wood, layers added without records ever being updated properly. It creates blind spots." Lucas glanced at her. "Blind spots that can hide a bomb." "Yes," she said simply. There was no drama in her voice, only fact. "My brother died on a dock like this. Different port. Same assumptions." The words landed quietly between them. Elena did not elaborate, but she did not need to. The loss sat in her posture, in the controlled way she held herself, in the meticulous attention she gave to every detail now. Grief had not made her fragile. It had made her exacting. "I'm sorry," Lucas said. She acknowledged it with a slight nod. "That's why I don't trust clean readings," she added after a moment, "and why I'm glad your dog doesn't either." Havoc, as if aware of being discussed, looked up at her. Elena's expression softened briefly, a small, unguarded moment that passed almost as quickly as it appeared. She knelt a little, not close enough to intrude, but enough to meet the dog's eyeline. "Good instincts," she murmured. Havoc did not move. He simply watched her, calm and steady. Lucas felt the strange alignment settle into place. Not certainty, not yet, but the sense that the harbor was no longer a simple problem to be cleared and forgotten. It was something layered, something that demanded patience and attention from every angle, human and animal, data and instinct. An official called Elena back toward the dock, breaking the moment. She rose smoothly, turning back to Lucas. "I'll be here for a while," she said. "This place isn't finished talking yet." Lucas watched her walk away, then looked back out over the water. The harbor remained deceptively quiet, the city beyond it moving on as though nothing had happened. Havoc sat beside him, still watching. And Lucas understood with growing clarity that neither of them would be leaving any time soon. By midday, Port Townsend had shed the fog, but not the weight of the night before. Low clouds still pressed against the sky, flattening the light into a dull silver that reflected off the harbor like tarnished metal. The air smelled of wet timber and old salt, and the docks creaked softly as tides shifted beneath them. Tourists had begun to return to the waterfront cafes farther inland, unaware that a section of the harbor remained sealed off, watched by quiet men and one dog who refused to relax. Lucas Hartman stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold wind coming off the water. He had spent most of the morning observing rather than speaking, a habit shaped by years of letting patterns reveal themselves before drawing conclusions. His expression remained composed, but his attention never drifted. Every sound, every movement along the dock registered somewhere behind his eyes. He had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself clearly. It whispered, hid in margins, waited to be overlooked. Havoc stayed close to him, moving only when Lucas did. The German shepherd's pace was slower now, measured, his nose working constantly as they advanced along the secured perimeter. In daylight, the subtlety of his reactions was easier to see. Havoc did not strain at the leash or lunge toward anything specific. Instead, his body language shifted in degrees, muscles tightening, head lowering, breath changing rhythm. At 7 years old, he no longer wasted energy. Everything he did served a purpose. A few yards ahead, Elena Brooks knelt beside a section of dock that appeared unremarkable to the casual eye. She had shed her jacket and rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms marked with faint scars and the discoloration of long hours spent working with tools rather than behind a desk. Elena moved with quiet efficiency, her gestures precise, economical. She was not tall, but she carried herself with a kind of contained authority, the confidence of someone who trusted her understanding of systems more than opinions. She ran her gloved fingers along a metal brace bolted into the side of an older wooden beam. The wood was dark, swollen from years of exposure, its grain raised and splintered. The metal, by contrast, was newer, its surface too clean, its edges too sharp. Elena frowned slightly, eyes narrowing as she examined the junction point. Lucas approached slowly, careful not to interrupt her concentration. He had already noticed the same thing she was studying, though he lacked the language to define why it mattered. That was the difference between instinct and analysis. Both arrived at truth, but by different roads. "Elena," he said quietly. She glanced up, then back at the beam. "See this?" she asked, tapping the metal lightly with her knuckle. "This reinforcement wasn't part of the original dock design. It's not even from the last major retrofit. The alloy's too recent." Lucas leaned closer, studying the connection point. "Meaning someone added it later?" "Yes," she replied. "And not for structural reasons. If it were load-bearing, it would be placed differently. This looks like it was installed to conceal something, or at least to redirect attention." As if on cue, Havoc stiffened. His ears pricked forward, his head angling toward the same beam. He stepped closer, nostrils flaring, then paused. His breathing slowed, deliberate, focused. Lucas felt the leash tighten slightly as Havoc tested the air. Elena noticed immediately. She straightened, eyes flicking from the dog to the beam and back again. "He's reacting," she said, more statement than question. "Yes," Lucas answered, "same way he did last night." Havoc circled once, slow and careful, then stopped. His body went rigid, tail low and still. He did not sit this time. He did not need to. The tension running through him was unmistakable. Elena swallowed, her professional composure giving way to something more personal. "My brother," she said quietly, almost to herself, "used to say that the scariest failures were the ones that looked intentional, things designed to be missed." Lucas said nothing. He watched Havoc, trusting the dog's restraint as much as his alertness. "You think this dock was altered," he said, "not just repaired." Elena nodded. "I think parts of it were adapted, modified in ways that don't trigger standard inspections. Old wood masks, new metal masks cavities. It's clever." Havoc took another step, nose brushing close to the beam. His muscles bunched, every line of his body focused forward. Lucas tightened his grip slightly, grounding the dog without pulling him back. "Easy," he murmured. Elena exhaled slowly. "That's the problem with relying solely on data," she said. "It only confirms what it's been taught to look for. Anything outside that framework gets labeled as noise." Lucas glanced at her. "Instinct doesn't have that limitation." "No," she agreed, "but it needs someone willing to listen." They moved farther along the dock, Elena pointing out additional irregularities. Bolts that didn't match surrounding hardware, seams that had been filled and painted over too carefully. To Lucas, each detail alone meant little. Together, they formed a pattern that echoed Havoc's behavior too precisely to ignore. Havoc reacted again near a second junction point, this time pressing his nose briefly against the wood before pulling back sharply. His ears flattened for a moment, then lifted again. Lucas felt a chill settle into his chest. This was not coincidence. Elena straightened slowly. Her face had gone pale, though her voice remained steady. "These modifications create pockets," she said. "Hidden spaces, not big, but enough." "Enough for what?" Lucas asked, though he already knew. She met his gaze. "Enough for something that shouldn't be here." Havoc stood between them and the beam now, body angled protectively as if drawing an invisible line. Lucas placed a hand on his back, feeling the steady heat beneath his palm. The alignment was unmistakable. Data and instinct, finally speaking the same language. Lucas looked out over the harbor, the water deceptively calm beneath the gray sky. "So the sensors missed it," he said, "and Havoc didn't." Elena nodded once. "Because he wasn't looking for numbers. He was listening to what didn't belong." The wind shifted, carrying with it the low hum of the town behind them. Life continued, oblivious. Lucas understood then that the harbor had not been cleared. It had merely paused, waiting for someone to notice the conversation happening beneath its surface. He looked down at Havoc, who remained tense, unblinking. "Good work," Lucas said quietly. Havoc did not relax. Neither did Elena. And for the first time since the explosion, Lucas felt certain that whatever had been hidden here was no longer invisible. Dawn arrived at Port Townsend without color. A thick veil of fog rolled in from the water, flattening the harbor into a world of muted shapes and softened edges. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of salt and decaying wood, and every sound seemed to travel only a few feet before dissolving into the mist. The town behind the waterfront remained quiet, its streets empty, its windows dark. It was the hour when the city had not yet remembered itself, and the harbor belonged only to those awake enough to listen. Lucas Hartman walked slowly along the secured section of dock, his boots making almost no sound against the wet planks. He moved with deliberate care, the kind born not from fear, but from respect, for the environment, for the uncertainty that still clung to this place. He wore the same subdued tactical jacket as the day before, now zipped against the chill, his posture relaxed but alert. The night's lessons had not left him. They had settled deeper, reshaping the way he looked at every beam, every shadow, every stretch of water beneath his feet. Havoc moved at his side, close enough that Lucas could feel the dog's presence without glancing down. The German shepherd's coat was darkened by moisture, the gray along his muzzle more pronounced in the pale light. At 7 years old, Havoc carried himself with a calm authority that younger dogs lacked. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. His nose worked constantly, drawing in the fog-laden air in controlled breaths, sorting through layers of scent that told a story no map could capture. Behind them, the perimeter remained quiet. A small contingent of personnel stood at a distance, maintaining security without crowding the dock. Among them was Ryan Keller, the team leader from the initial operation, his broad frame barely visible through the fog. Keller's presence was steady, unobtrusive. He trusted Lucas to do what needed to be done. That trust was not verbalized. It did not need to be. Elena Brooks waited farther back, near a temporary work table set up under a portable light. She was wrapped in her jacket again, shoulders hunched slightly against the cold, her tablet balanced against her forearm. Her dark hair was tied back as usual, though the fog had already worked loose a few strands. Elena's expression was focused, intent, the grief that had shaped her years ago now channeled into relentless attention. She did not approach the dock unless invited. She understood the boundary between observation and intrusion. Lucas raised a hand briefly, signaling to Keller that he and Havoc were moving ahead. Keller nodded once, barely visible through the haze. They advanced. The fog thickened as they reached the section Elena had marked the day before. Visibility dropped to a few yards at best. The harbor felt smaller, closer, as though the mist were pressing in from all sides. Lucas slowed his pace, aware that Havoc's movements were becoming more deliberate. Havoc's ears shifted forward, his stride shortened. The change was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who knew him as well as Lucas did. Havoc's head lowered, nose nearly brushing the damp wood as he inhaled deeply. His breathing changed rhythm, slower, more focused. Lucas felt the leash tighten slightly, not from pulling, but from resistance. Havoc stopped. Not abruptly, not in alarm. He took one more careful step, then another, testing the air. His paw scraped lightly against the dock, claws catching on the raised grain of the wood. The sound was faint, almost lost in the fog, but it cut through Lucas with surgical precision. Then Havoc sat down. It was controlled, intentional. His back straightened, tail low and still, eyes fixed on a point ahead that looked no different from any other section of the dock. His entire body radiated tension, a silent declaration that something here did not belong. Lucas did not hesitate. He raised his fist sharply, the signal crisp and final. "Lock it down," he said quietly into his mic. Behind him, movement rippled outward in disciplined response. Keller's voice came back immediately, low and controlled. "Perimeter sealed." Lucas knelt beside Havoc, one hand resting firmly on the dog's shoulder. He did not try to calm him. Havoc did not need calming. He needed acknowledgement. "You got something," Lucas murmured. Havoc did not look at him. Lucas straightened and scanned the area. The fog swallowed the far end of the dock, turning distance into uncertainty. He keyed his mic again. "No one advances past my position. I want full containment." Elena stepped closer, stopping several feet short of the danger zone. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were sharp. "Same spot as yesterday?" she asked. Lucas shook his head slightly. "Close, but not exact." That detail mattered. Elena swallowed and nodded, fingers tightening around her tablet. "That means it's not just one anomaly," she said quietly. "It's a pattern." Lucas looked down at Havoc. The dog's muscles were coiled, ready, but he remained seated. This was not agitation. This was confirmation. "Bring the specialists," Lucas ordered. Minutes stretched. The fog refused to lift, clinging stubbornly to the dock as if guarding its secret. When the explosive ordnance team arrived, their movements were careful, precise. The lead technician was a man named Thomas Reed, mid-40s, lean with a face etched by years of controlled tension. Reed spoke little. He trusted procedure the way some men trusted faith. Reed crouched several yards from Havoc's position, studying the planks. "Dog's alert is solid?" he asked. Lucas nodded. "As solid as it gets." Reed motioned for his team to begin. Instruments were deployed, probes, scanners, fiber optic cameras small enough to slip between boards. The technology hummed softly, its quiet confidence at odds with the stillness of Havoc's posture. The first readings came back clean. Reed frowned slightly, but did not comment. He adjusted the angle, tried again, sweeping wider this time. The fog condensed on his gloves as he worked. A long minute passed, then another. Lucas felt his jaw tighten. He had seen this before, the creeping temptation to doubt the dog because the screen refused to cooperate. He did not give it voice. Reed paused, then leaned closer to the display. "Hold on," he muttered. The screen flickered. A shape emerged, irregular, dense, hidden beneath layers of reinforced wood and metal. Reed's posture stiffened. "There," he said. "That's not structural." Elena inhaled sharply behind him. Reed adjusted the probe, feeding the camera deeper. The image sharpened slowly, revealing a compact mass nestled within a deliberately altered cavity. Wires ran inward, carefully concealed, insulated against moisture. No timer was visible. No immediate trigger. Reed exhaled slowly. "Unarmed," he said. "For now." Lucas felt the weight of the words settle over the dock. "How big?" Keller asked over the comms. Reed swallowed. "Big enough," he said. "If this had gone off, it would have taken half the harbor with it. Secondary damage alone, fuel lines, boats, infrastructure, it would have been catastrophic." Silence followed. Havoc remained seated, unmoving. Lucas crouched beside him again, hand steady on the dog's back. "Good," he said quietly. "You held." Elena stepped forward just enough to see the screen, her face tight with controlled shock. "They built it to wait," she said. "To be missed." Lucas nodded. And it almost was. The fog began to thin slightly, pale light bleeding into the harbor as dawn edged closer. The city would wake soon. People would walk these docks again, unaware of what had been hidden beneath their feet. Lucas looked down at Havoc, still alert, still focused. "All right," he murmured. "We've got it from here." Havoc did not relax. Not yet. The harbor did not celebrate when the threat was neutralized. There were no cheers, no visible release of relief, only a gradual loosening of posture as people allowed their shoulders to drop a fraction and their breathing to slow. By late morning, Port Townsend looked almost ordinary again. The fog had thinned into a pale veil, sunlight breaking through in narrow bands that glimmered across the water and the hulls of moored boats. Seagulls returned to their familiar arguments above the docks, indifferent to how close the harbor had come to vanishing. The unexploded device was removed under strict protocol, sealed, and taken away without spectacle. When it was finally gone, what remained was not triumph, but quiet. A space opened where danger had been, and no one seemed entirely sure how to step into it. Lucas Hartman watched the operation from a distance, Havoc at his side. Lucas looked unchanged on the surface, standing tall with the same composed stillness that had defined him since the first night. Yet something inside him had shifted. The constant internal pressure, the sense of waiting for the next wrong sound or sudden movement, had eased just enough for him to notice its absence. He was not relaxed. He was simply less clenched. Havoc remained alert, seated with his body angled toward the water, ears lifting at every unfamiliar noise. His work was not finished in his own mind. The German shepherd had learned over 7 years that danger rarely announced its departure cleanly. His muscles stayed ready, his gaze steady, as if the harbor itself were a living thing that could decide to change its mind. Elena Brooks approached slowly, respecting the quiet gravity of the moment. She carried herself differently now. The tension that usually sharpened her movements had softened, replaced by something closer to fatigue. Her dark jacket hung open, and faint shadows under her eyes spoke of long nights and memories stirred loose. Elena was not fragile, but she was human, and the weight of what had almost happened pressed visibly on her. "They're saying it's clear," she said, stopping beside Lucas, her voice low. "As clear as it can be." Lucas nodded. "Clear doesn't always mean finished." A corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "No, I suppose not." She glanced at Havoc, who had not looked away from the dock. "He doesn't believe it either." Lucas followed her gaze. "He believes in patterns," he said, "and patterns take time to break." They stood together in silence for a moment, listening to the harbor find its rhythm again. Elena folded her arms, then let them fall back to her sides. "When they took it out," she said, "I thought I'd feel lighter." "And you don't?" She shook her head. "I feel older, like something I've been carrying finally showed itself." Lucas understood that feeling well. "Sometimes knowing is heavier than not knowing," he said. "But it's also the only way forward." Elena studied him, really looked at him this time, as if recalibrating her understanding of who he was beyond uniform and role. "You don't talk much," she observed, "but when you do, it sounds like you've had practice surviving things that don't leave marks." Lucas gave a faint, humorless smile. "Marks fade. Habits don't." Later that evening, after the harbor had been reopened in stages and most of the temporary personnel had cleared out, Lucas returned to the small rented room he had been assigned near the waterfront. It was modest, clean, and quiet, with a narrow bed and a window that overlooked the dark water. Havoc lay near the door, positioned so he could see both the entrance and Lucas at once. For the first time in days, Lucas slept. Not deeply, not without dreams, but without the sharp electric jolts that had been snapping him awake since the explosion. His sleep came in uneven stretches, but it came, and when he woke, his chest did not feel tight with expectation. He lay still for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the harbor at night, and recognized the unfamiliar sensation of rest. Havoc lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the window, then relaxed again when nothing followed. He did not sleep as deeply. He never did after an operation like this. His role was to remain just aware enough for both of them. The days that followed settled into a quieter rhythm. Lucas remained on site in an advisory capacity, his role officially reduced, but unofficially central. People asked his opinion more often now. Not loudly, not ceremoniously, but with a respect that had grown out of witnessing judgment that saved lives. Elena worked alongside him during daylight hours, moving between sections of the dock with her tablet and tools, documenting every anomaly she could find. Their conversations grew longer, less guarded. They spoke about structure and stress points, about how old materials held memory, about how places could absorb intent the same way people did. One afternoon, as the sun broke through fully for the first time, Elena sat on the edge of the dock, boots dangling inches above the water. Lucas stood nearby, Havoc resting at his feet. "My brother used to bring his coffee here," Elena said suddenly. "Same spot. He said it helped him think." Lucas said nothing, allowing the space to hold the words. "He died believing he'd done his job right," she continued, "that the inspections were enough. I think that's what stays with me the most." Lucas watched the water ripple beneath her boots. "Doing your job right doesn't always mean catching everything," he said. "Sometimes it means noticing what doesn't fit and refusing to ignore it." Elena nodded slowly. "That's why I trust him," she said, glancing at Havoc. Havoc's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, but he did not move. That evening, as the light faded and the harbor lights flickered on, one by one, Lucas and Elena walked the perimeter together. There was no urgency now, no immediate threat demanding action, but Havoc remained watchful, his movements measured, his attention sharp. Lucas noticed the difference in himself most clearly at night. He slept longer. He dreamed less violently. When he woke, it was not always with his heart racing. The space left behind by danger was not empty, but it was manageable. Still, Havoc never fully relaxed. On the third night after the device was removed, he paused suddenly during their routine walk, head lifting, nostrils flaring. He did not sit, he did not alert, he simply stood very still, listening to something that Lucas could not hear. Lucas stopped with him, waiting. After a few seconds, Havoc exhaled and continued forward, the moment passing without incident. Elena, who had been walking a few steps behind them, watched closely. "He's still working," she said quietly. Lucas nodded. "So am I." They reached the end of the dock and stood there, the water stretching dark and calm before them. The harbor looked peaceful now, almost forgiving, but neither of them believed that peace was permanent. Havoc sat at Lucas's side, vigilant but calm. Danger had been removed, but its echo remained, shaping the way they listened, the way they moved, the way they chose not to assume safety too quickly. And in that space after danger, something else began to form. Not closure, not certainty, but a quieter understanding of what it meant to stay. The offer came without ceremony, no formal meeting, no speeches. Just a quiet conversation in a temporary office overlooking the harbor, where paperwork lay stacked like a second shoreline. Lucas Hartman listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, and nodded once. He did not treat the decision as a promotion. He treated it as a responsibility that had already chosen him. By the end of the week, the training yard outside Port Townsend was alive again before sunrise. Floodlights cut through the morning haze, throwing long shadows across packed gravel and concrete lanes. The air was cold and sharp, clean enough to sting the lungs awake. Engines idled, radios murmured, boots moved with purpose. Lucas stood at the edge of the yard, jacket zipped, posture loose but ready. He looked different here, not softer, not older, more precise. The tension that once lived in his shoulders had been reshaped into focus. This was not a place for reflection. This was a place for transfer. Havoc waited at his side. The German shepherd watched the teams assemble, ears shifting as new sounds layered over familiar ones. At 7 years old, his movements were economical, his attention selective. He no longer reacted to noise for its own sake. He reacted to meaning. His coat had been brushed clean, the gray along his muzzle, catching the artificial light, giving him a dignified, almost deliberate presence. He was not here to demonstrate tricks. He was here to remind people that awareness was not loud. The new handlers formed a loose line facing Lucas. There were 6 of them, each paired with a K9. The dogs varied in age and temperament. One was a young Belgian Malinois with restless energy, muscles twitching beneath a glossy coat. Another was a stocky Labrador retriever, older, steady-eyed, his demeanor calm and workmanlike. Each handler mirrored their dog in subtle ways. Closest to Lucas stood Aaron Pike, late 20s, tall and narrow, his movements quick, his jaw tight with the effort of containing nerves. He had come up fast through the ranks, smart, ambitious, used to proving himself through speed. His dog, a Malinois named Vex, leaned forward against the leash, eyes bright, ready to move. Beside him was Marissa Cole, no relation, early 30s, medium height, athletic build. her dark hair pulled into a severe knot that suggested discipline rather than vanity. She spoke little, watched everything. Her partner, a German shepherd named Orion, stood quietly at heel, gaze steady, tail relaxed. Marissa had lost a handler partner 2 years earlier in a training accident. Since then, she trusted preparation more than confidence. Lucas stepped forward. "We're not starting with commands," he said. His voice carried easily without force. "We're starting with observation." A few brows furrowed. Aaron shifted his weight, eager. Lucas gestured to Havoc. "This dog saved lives because he slowed down when everything else said go. That's the lesson, not technique, not gear, timing." He turned and began walking toward the obstacle lane. Havoc moved with him, pace measured. The handlers followed, dogs adjusting automatically. "Run the lane," Lucas said. "Standard pace, no shortcuts." They moved, the yard filled with motion. Dogs advanced, handlers guided, equipment hummed. The rhythm was efficient, practiced. Lucas watched without interrupting, his attention fixed not on speed, but on micro-changes. Breathing, ears, leash tension. Halfway through the lane, Havoc slowed. Not much, just enough. His head dipped, his stride shortened. The gravel shifted under his paw as his claws scraped lightly against the surface. Lucas stopped. The line behind him hesitated, confused. Aaron took another step before catching himself. Vex surged forward, frustrated. Lucas raised a hand. "Freeze." They froze. Havoc sat. The yard went silent. Lucas turned slowly, eyes moving across the line. "Right there," he said. "That's the moment." Aaron frowned. "Moment of what, sir?" "Decision," Lucas replied. "You felt it, that urge to keep momentum, to assume you knew better." Marissa nodded slightly. She had felt it too. Lucas walked back along the line, stopping in front of Aaron. "If your dog slows," he said, "you slow. If your dog sits, you stop. You do not argue. You do not rationalize. You do not ask the equipment to confirm what the animal is already telling you." Aaron swallowed. "Even if the sensors say clear?" "Especially then," Lucas said. They reset. Again and again, Lucas ran them through variations. Sometimes Havoc led, sometimes Orion, sometimes a dog reacted, and nothing followed. Lucas let the silence do the teaching. Between drills, Elena Brooks watched from the fence line. She had not planned to stay, but curiosity had pulled her back. She leaned against the cold metal railing, jacket pulled tight, eyes tracking the teams with an engineer's precision. She saw the same thing Lucas did, the moment when human certainty outpaced animal caution. When the drills paused, she approached, careful not to disrupt the rhythm. "You're training restraint," she said. Lucas nodded. "Most people train reaction." She smiled faintly. "That's backwards." By midday, the handlers were sweating despite the cold. Movements had slowed. Breathing had changed. Dogs responded differently now, less frantic, more attuned. Lucas gathered them again. "This isn't about obedience," he said. "It's about humility. The dog does not care about your rank, your timeline, or your confidence. The dog cares about what doesn't belong." He looked at each handler in turn. "If you remember nothing else, remember this. When the dog slows, you slow. When the dog sits, the world stops." Havoc stood beside him, still, eyes forward. The lesson landed. That afternoon, Lucas signed the final paperwork. His role was official now. Senior K9 trainer, no expiration date, no fanfare. As the yard emptied and the sun dipped lower, Elena walked beside Lucas toward the harbor. "You changed the way they think today," she said. Lucas shrugged. "I just showed them where to pause." They stopped at the edge of the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the late light in broken patterns. Havoc sat between them, watchful. "He's still working," Elena said softly. Lucas nodded. So are we. The wind shifted. Somewhere down the line, a metal fitting clanged lightly against a mast. Havoc's ears lifted, then settled. The lesson had been passed on, and it would keep passing long after the harbor forgot how close it had come. Port Townsend returned to itself quietly. Boats moved in and out of the harbor on familiar schedules. Cafes reopened their doors. The docks filled again with footsteps that carried no memory of how close they had come to disappearing. Life resumed, not because danger had been conquered, but because it had been paused long enough to pass. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no medals pinned beneath flashing lights. The work had ended the way it began, without spectacle. Reports were filed. Names were recorded. Then the harbor was released back to the people who depended on it. Lucas Hartman stood near the edge of the dock as evening settled in, the light thinning into long reflections across the water. He wore civilian clothes now, simple and unremarkable, blending easily into the background of a town that did not know him. He preferred it that way. Some victories were not meant to be pointed at. Havoc sat beside him, posture relaxed but attentive, eyes following the slow movement of the tide. The German shepherd looked older in the soft light, the gray along his muzzle, clear and honest. He had returned to a quieter state, not because he believed the world was safe, but because he understood when vigilance could rest without surrender. Helena Brooks joined them a moment later, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She looked calmer than she had in days, though the sharpness in her eyes remained. Grief did not vanish. It learned where to stand. "They'll never know," she said, looking out over the water. Lucas shook his head. "They don't need to." She smiled faintly. "My brother used to say the best work disappears." Lucas glanced at Havoc. "Some of it leaves a trace." The harbor lights flickered on one by one, steady and ordinary. Somewhere behind them, a chain rattled softly, metal against metal. Havoc's ears lifted, then lowered again. Nothing followed. Lucas felt the quiet settle fully this time. Not emptiness, space preserved by a single decision to stop moving forward. He understood then that miracles were not always loud or blinding. Sometimes they arrived as restraint, as trust, as a man lifting his foot and choosing not to place it down. Lucas rested his hand briefly on Havoc's back. Elena stood close, sharing the silence. 3 figures against the water. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic, just lives continuing because 1 second had been given the respect it deserved. And the harbor breathed on. This story is not about explosions or heroes in uniform. It is about 1 quiet second. A second where a man chose to trust instead of rushing forward. In that pause there was protection. In that pause there was grace. Sometimes God does not speak through thunder or fire. Sometimes he speaks through a hesitation in your chest. Through a warning you cannot explain. Through a voice that says, wait, even when logic says, go. The miracle is not always what happens next. The miracle is that you stopped long enough to be saved. In daily life, we face our own docks and our own steps forward, a decision to speak or stay silent, to turn left or right, to push harder or slow down. We pray for clear signs, but often God gives us something quieter. Discernment, instinct, peace that does not match the situation. When that moment comes, do not ignore it. Trust that God may be protecting you from what you cannot yet see. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to slow down today. Listen more carefully. Trust that God is working even in silence. Share this message with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment and tell others what this story reminded you of. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, hope, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and keep you. May he guide your steps and give you the wisdom to stop when stopping is the miracle. If you believe that sometimes salvation begins with 1 second of trust, comment Amen.